Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So tonight, Corey and I are shooting with a model named Maria. They're actually already shooting. Up in Fed Square is this insane LED Christmas tree. It's only up for like Christmas, obviously, because it's a Christmas tree. So we've come down to shoot at it. They're looking sick.
This happens every like 20 minutes. Oh, I love that. Like I love the oranges in this one, for instance.
Oh wow.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
So
I like how my hair kind of changes colour with light.
Yeah, it's super sick. Yeah.
Cool, so the goal of this particular photo is we're going to try and frame Maria using sparklers on either side. So rather than having Maria hold two, we're going to have Maria hold one to one side, and then we're going to hold one that's closer to camera so that it's more out of focus, gives us a nice depth of field and some more bokeh. And it's going to frame Maria by having, like I said, one on one side, one on the other. So if everything goes well, it should look something like this.
Okay, so first things first, Happy New Year. So this shoot that we did was super fun for me because I got to revisit the location a year later, but I had basically a year's worth of editing those photos to come up with new ideas that I wanted to go into it with. So this year I came in a bit better prepared, so I brought a mirror, I brought a lens prism, and I brought a load of sparklers. So I brought 180 sparklers, which we didn't use, but you know, it was better to have it there than not. The shot that we're going to do today is this one, and to get this I used a lens prism, and if you haven't used a lens prism before, they look like this. So you can get them in lots of different shapes and sizes. My one's just a little triangular prism, and all you do to get shots with this rainbow effect is just hold it in front of the lens and just turn it and move it around. So that'll create this little rainbow pattern you can see on the bottom of the photo. And you can pick these up from eBay or Amazon for a couple of dollars. So they're super fantastic to use. In this photo, I'm going to go through how I edit from start to finish and give you just a couple of useful little tricks that I've learned, especially using the auto white balance tool. So to start off in this image, what I'm going to do is click on the white balance tool. With this, you can go around and essentially click different spots, and what your Lightroom will do is try to pick the correct white balance for it. I do this on every single portrait to try and get the best skin tones going into it. So if I click down, let's say here, it changes her skin tone to this kind of like pinked orange. And essentially you just trial and error until it starts looking nice. So down here it thinks it should be this, but I found, let's go, so here it looks pretty nice for me. And then you can go through and adjust the temperatures. So I personally, for my style of editing, I like it a bit warmer. So I'll go through and just move this up until I'm happy. And then same with the tint. So it's just a lot of playing around. I think that's where I'll start. There's a little bit of a green tinge to her skin, but we'll fix that all up as we go. With this, I'm also then going to take it into Photoshop and fix up like the little holes that you can see here, fill those in with lights, maybe fix up some of these scraggly hairs, and see how we go from there. So I'm just gonna bring up the image a little bit in terms of exposure, and I always add just a little bit of contrast. The next thing I do is I go down to calibration and I start messing around with these settings just to bring a little bit of different color into the image. So I love to bring the hues across to the left. I find for me it's just where my image looks the nicest. So that typical teal orange look is if you essentially bring your blues to the left and you take your greens and your reds to the right. So we're gonna move that one, let's go orange. We'll turn our hair more to an orange color. So once I've done that, I go straight back up to the top. Well, I enable these. Then I go straight back up to the top, and now I start playing around. So I kind of want a bit in bring my highlights down to 75, and usually when I bring my highlights down, I'll up my shadows, or vice versa. So I'm usually just playing it by eye. Here we're just looking at the whites in the image, so you can see it in the lights. So I'm going to bring that down to here. Also, one thing I keep in mind is her skin. So with everything as I edit, I'm looking at her skin and kind of her eyes as where my focal points will be. So as I go through, that's going to be where I pay a lot of attention to. I always drop my texture, and there's a nifty trick if you just want to do skin retouching through textures. Essentially what texture does is if you look at, let's zoom this right in, if we look at her skin, especially around her forehead, as we drag that texture down, it smoothens it all out. So it takes texture out, makes it very dull-like. I think that's far too harsh, but you can do it both ways. It's kind of like clarity. So I usually look at her skin and I just bring it down a little bit so it's a bit smoother, but that it doesn't make the whole image look fake. So then I move down, we're going to play a lot with the vibrance. I usually up my vibrance and then I drop my saturation. It's just I find it looks nicer than doing it the other way around. So I'm going to bring this down to 8. So I want to go with a bit of an orange hair color because I'm biased and I like gingers. So we're going to change the hue, so take the reds out and turn them more into an orange. So if you look at this part of her hair, we can click and just slightly, say maybe 10. Anyone that knows my editing knows, or anything about me knows that I hate the color green. So typically I will play around with the yellows and the greens and change greens to like an orange tone because I hate the color green. But because this one isn't terrible for what it is and it looks good in lighting, I just hate it in grass. Then I'm going to play around with the saturation. Next thing we do is just bring luminance. Luminance is another good way of just brightening up skin. So I click this little dot, which then lets you pick the color. So as I flick across colors, you can see them change in the luminance tab. So if I wanted to try and pick what this color was, I just scroll over it and it'll only pick what it perceives as that color. So I take this, let's bring orange back. So I take this, I click the little dot, and I bring it over her skin, and you can kind of start to really play around with just her face. So let's do that. 153. I go with 153, it's just been a color that I really like in my highlights lately. And I found that through a lot of trial and error. Alright, so next we're going to do a bit on the tone curve, because I've started to get my colors where I want them. I think her face is still a bit dark, so I'm going to try and mess around with it just to bring that out a little bit. I don't change a lot in my tone curves, my reds, my blues, and my greens. I mainly do all of that through here. I just prefer it. I know some people do a lot of like heavy colors in here, like I think North Borders and 7th Era do their blues through their tone curves, but that's not something I'm too much into. I change mine more through temperatures and how I shoot. So at the moment I'm kind of happy with that. I know that I'm going to go in and fix up a couple of the colors. So what I'm going to do now is play with her eyes. So I use the adjustment brush and I click on her eyes. If you press O, you can toggle this red kind of like coloring, so it shows you what you're coloring in. Press O to get rid of it. All I'm going to do is color on both of her eyes. And I have a bit of an eye enhancement setup that I use. And all that does is just brings out her eyes a little bit more. Next thing I'm going to do is going to add a couple just gradients and just up the exposure on them and maybe a bit of the saturation. Yeah, maybe there. Last one I'm going to do on this is my skin retouch using a gradient filter. So to do this one, select your gradient filter, go to the very bottom and drag it down. So if you press O, you can see it's selected everything. I'm just going to bring this to base. Base is just the setting I have, which makes everything neutral. Now we're going to use Range Mask Finder, click Color, and use the eyedropper tool. So now I'm going to click on her skin. So it'll show you that it picks kind of all of the colors it perceives there. And I'm just going to bring this down until it's pretty much just on her face, or as close to it. So it's around a 3 for this image. Let's zoom in a bit. Now I'm going to just reduce the texture again. So you can see as I reduce the texture, especially on this part of her forehead, it makes it softer again. I'm only going to do that a little bit and bring that back. So these areas that it's selected are just now a little bit softer again. So that was what we started with, and we're currently here. So what I'm going to do now is take this straight into Photoshop and do the final adjustments that I want to make. So first thing I do every time is clean up the image. So Control J lets me duplicate the layer. I am by no means a guru at Photoshop. I'm still learning it all. If you're looking for really good Photoshop ones, Piximperect does some fantastic tutorials. So you should definitely watch him. But I'm going to just go through and I'm just going to add these lights in, just to kind of fill the frame a bit more. Cool, so next thing I'm going to do is just use my patch tool, and I'm just going to have a little look around her face, see if there's anything I want to change, and do a little bit with the hair. So let's just have a look at what it looks like. That smile lines. This is all down to personal preference in the end. Last thing we're going to do is just fix up these scraggly hairs. Up here, down here. I'm sure there's more efficient ways to do it, but I'm just going to do it using the Glow Stack tool and healing brush. So that's before and that is after. So as you can see, we've cleaned up a lot of these dots and we kind of fixed this side of the hair here. Which overall isn't too shabby. Yeah, cool. So next thing I'm going to do is just merge that down because I'm happy with that to now be the base layer. The next thing I want to do is kind of brighten up her face. So I'm going to do that just using a tone curve. So go to curves and I'm just going to bring it up a bit, maybe to about here. Go to the layers and then press Control I. That inverts that layer. So now if I use a brush tool, I can physically paint on the exposure to where I want it. So I'm just going to paint a bit onto her forehead. So that's what it's done so far. I'm just in all these darker areas just to try and bring out her face a bit more. I think that's a bit bright, so if I press X, click back on my layer. If I press X, it'll flip it to black, and with the blacks, you can outpainted, I guess. So it's kind of like undoing what you've done. For now, I'm happy with that. So we've brought a bit of color back into her face. That's a bit too bright. What I'm going to do next is make another curve, and I'm going to bring this one all the way up, like quite intensely. Control I to invert the layer, as you can see here. And I'm going to call this one Eyes. I'm really bad at naming things, so I always forget because I know the order I do them in, but for argument's sake, let's go Eyes and Skin. I'm going to go back to my eyes level, come in nice and tight, and I'm just going to paint in detail, in white. I'm just going to paint over her eye. So I first saw this in a tutorial by Piximperect on how to bring out really good eye detail, and since then I thought it was just one of the greatest things ever. And I think Jon Snip does something similar, but he has a very great tutorial on it. And if you're not familiar with him, I highly recommend. Overall, I want to just up the brightness a little bit. Yeah. Probably a bit too high, if I'm being completely honest. Easy. Last thing I'm going to do is just make a last bit using selective color. Selective color is fantastic for actually tweaking colors to make them exactly how you want. It just gives you a lot more freedom than Lightroom does. I actually started playing around with this after I watched a video by another Melbourne creator named Noske, who does like these really insanely cool dreamy skies, and yeah, does some sick edits. And he did a whole thing on how he goes through this, so I think I'll link that below as well. I'll link everyone below, everyone's getting linked, because they're all sick. Neutrals gives the whole image a tint, so I don't want to change that, but I do want to go slightly on the pink side, I think. Do this. So what I've done, I've added a bit too much, but I like the coloring, so I'm going to go back to the reds in a second and change her skin tones. So let's go back to reds and kind of try and pull it back. So I moved the yellows first because in the where was it? In the neutrals, I took the yellows down this way, so if I bring them back in the reds, it kind of balances it out. But for now, I think I'm happy with that. So without doing any of the selected color and then adding in. So it's a bit of a subtle difference, but I think it adds to it. Last thing I'm going to do is crop, so 4x5 for Instagram, and I'm just going to play with this until I get her eyes on one of the lines. Yeah, something like that. So that is the final image. Yeah, so a couple of things, I guess, based on reflection from this shoot that I would have done differently. I would have paid more attention to her hair and the strands that were a bit loose. I'm quite happy overall with like the use of props. I would have liked to have done more with sparklers. I'm very happy with kind of the posing that's came out and all that. So hopefully that video was a little bit useful. Maybe it taught you something different, or maybe it was just cool to see how I actually edit. Thank you for staying and watching the video. If this is something you kind of like, let me know and I might do a couple more, show you the whole shoot from start to finish. But until next time, have a good day.